1954, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously in Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka that racial segregation in schools was unconstitutional. This decision overruled Plessy v. Ferguson in schools, and for the first time in all of America, black students and white students could study in the same classroom together. There was widespread resistance to this court decision in the still segregated South. In moderate cities like Little Rock, Arkansas at Central High School, and at universities in the Deep South, most notably Alabama and Mississippi's Ole Miss. However, some of the most persistent resistors were not from the Deep South but a prominent northern city. Since the 1960s, the Boston City Council, led by Louise Day Hicks, had resisted efforts by African American parents to desegregate schools in Boston, claiming
Negro parents believe that a predominantly Negro school is inferior per se, but we here in Boston do not believe that premise.
Frustrated black parents tried a number of strategies to force school desegregation. This included 1 in 5 students boycotting on February 26, 1964, with some attending freedom schools set up for them. However, to quote Ronald Formaziano in Boston Against Busing, boycott made little impact on the school committee, and its implacability led integrationists to turn for help to sympathetic state authorities. They were successful in getting the Racial Imbalance Act of 1965 passed in Massachusetts, but the Boston School Committee did not comply with that for another 9 years. In those 9 years, there was a visit from Dr. Martin Luther King, who said that African Americans should not tolerate less than quality integrated education across the board, and countless frustrating school committee meetings filled with rebuffals of great ideas.
Any school that is predominantly Negro in Boston is an inadequate school. Mrs. Johnson, the superintendent of schools, has stated as his policy that a racially imbalanced school is not educationally harmful.
Seeing the political process as a dead end, in 1972, led by the NAACP, parents filed a class action suit in federal court. In June 1974, federal judge Arthur Garrity ruled that the Boston School Committee had maintained a segregated school system and ordered that busing start immediately. Immediately, plans for opposing this decision began to form.
So I suggest to you, if we're going to win, if you're going to keep your children in their neighborhood schools, that you join with the rest of the city on September the 9th in a grand march before the federal building.
In attendance at the march was strong pro-busser Senator Ted Kennedy, whose family had been the pride and joy of South Boston for years. However, he was booed and opposed by ROAR, or Restore Our Alienated Rights, founded by Louise Day Hicks.
Just because I'm white doesn't mean that the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to me either. I am white and I want my rights.
Seeing Judge Garrity as an outsider from Wellesley who didn't have to suffer any of the effects of the decision and was trying to break up the tight-knit community of South Boston, most white parents in South Boston stood together in opposition to the court decision and forced their kids to boycott school on the first day.
Tearing them apart. People, as a community, it's tearing them apart. They may say this is helping, it's tearing them apart. I'm not for all this. I don't care. My one will not go to school, but it's tearing them apart.
Black parents also employed highly polarized rhetoric in order to paint the anti-bussers as racist.
We don't teach our kids to hate anybody. All we want for our kids is to love and to get a decent education and to live decently as human beings. But we're not even as distinguished as human beings as far as East Boston goes or South Boston. We're niggers. And I would be damned if I had any child of mine exposed to anything like that. I wouldn't want my child to sit beside it because, see, I'm not going to teach it to hate. And that's what's happening. That's the lesson that those kids have been getting out there in South Boston. Stand beside mommy, sweetie, and throw a rock at the nigger.
No, they left over there. All those people out there are Irish. They left her out there. And they refuse to go get her.
This war of words soon turned violence, as evidenced by this footage of white protesters beating a black motorist. Violence reached its peak when Michael Faith, a white student, was stabbed in December 1974 by a black student during an altercation. White parents soon surrounded the school and refused to let the African American students leave.
Everybody but the police off the apron.
In a desperate attempt to keep the peace, Louise Day Hicks appeared before the crowd and demanded that they allow the black students to leave the school.
I want to allow the black children to go back to Rockford. There's only one way to get them back to Rockford, and that's to have them go back by bus. Let's get them back. Okay. I'm going to ask you, would you please move to the other side so they can go back?
The crowd did not comply, so, borrowing a tactic from the Southern Civil Rights Movement, black volunteers loaded decoy buses while the black students escaped out the back. The school committee was forced to close down the schools after this horrific incident. A year after this incident, Judge Garrity found 3 school committee members in contempt of court and decided to take over the busing operation himself.
I mean, just time will change these people's minds, in your opinion?
No, I think, no, not necessarily. I think that time will bring about an understanding on the part of most people that there's no alternative but to compliance with the principles set out by the Supreme Court of the United States.
6 months after Garrity took over, the New York Times reported that Boston had lost almost 18,000 white students in those 6 months. In the ensuing decade, the Boston School Committee fought hard against Garrity and others who they viewed as outsiders trying to break up their strong community bonds.
It seems to me that Judge Garrity is going to bring us this plan with the boot of official authority and the uniform. In a certain sense, you can say that Reconstruction has finally come to the North with a vengeance.
During that time, there was countless debate and argument, and the only people who seemed to make sense were the students attending the schools in Boston.
What do you think is going to happen when you go to school?
When we go up there, we're going to be stoned. It's not fair to me, because why is the other way around when they come up here? When they come up here, we won't mess with them, so why when we come up there, they mess with us?
What do you think about the people of South Boston, Joanne? If you had a message you'd like to tell them, what would it be?
I don't think it's fair. It's not fair to me.
During Garrity's rule, attendance dropped over 20%. In the early 80s, Garrity began his plans for withdrawal from the public schools. He handed over control of the desegregation program in 1983 and officially withdrew in 1985. In 2000, the Boston Public Schools officially dropped race as a factor in school selection. Although resistance to desegregation was primarily Southern, Boston showed that when you break community ties, Northerners can become just as racist even in the cradle of liberty.